Hi, I'm Heins, Director of Fitness Education for Onnit, and I'm going to show you how to perform the single leg kettlebell deadlift and how to use it in a strength building lower body workout. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. It's amazing when we were younger how effortlessly we walk, run, and jump through this big wide playground called the world. It's so easy to take for granted. Over time, however, many of us realize it takes more attention to keep that exuberant freedom. One incredibly effective means of doing so is incorporating more single leg exercises into your routine. A great addition to your single leg work are kettlebells. 1, they are easier to manage than larger equipment like barbells and plates. 2, they're better contoured than dumbbells to position in a wider variety of ways around your body. 3, they provide an offset center of balance, which further challenges your need to develop stability and control. We often rely on the fact that we have both legs to provide balance, support, and a stable base of strength. Just because we have a greater sense of evenness, though, doesn't mean both sides are doing their part equally. And that can lead to increasing levels of muscular and structural imbalance, a higher likelihood of injury, and leaking your strength output potential. As a starting point, we're going to look at the single leg kettlebell deadlift, a very effective exercise for getting your legs, hips, glutes, and adductors back in sync. So let's hit up the 5 major points to set up for your single leg kettlebell deadlift. We're gonna work this as a high hip hinge. So that means that when we go into our hinge, we're going to have a slight bend in the knee, and we're going to keep our hips higher. So rather than squatting down towards the ground, we're going to sit back as we go further. Now, what helps with this goal is you have a floating leg with a foot behind you that you can use as part of your targeting system. You're going to think about from here, finding your balance point, holding onto the kettlebell in front, picking your foot up, slight bend in your standing base leg, and hinging back and high. You can use your floating leg as a target towards an imaginary bullseye behind you, and as you're doing that, that naturally sets you up to sit back better. You want to feel this in your hamstrings and your glutes, really activating through the process. Second part is contact with the floor. A big part of our balance is how is our foot resting on the ground. So you want to think about having heel well planted, having ball of foot, even balance there, and your big toe connected to the ground. If you find yourself with your foot coming up off of the ground, you're going to have a much harder time being stable and actually going through the movement. So again, push contact through the ground. From that contact, you're also going to think about pressing into the floor. Far too often, we'll collapse in our hip or collapse into the leg as we try and maintain balance going up and down. Actually push into the floor without locking your leg out, but push into the floor, and that will create stability up the chain as you high hinge and press back up through the ground. Number 3, we're going to think about hip and spine rotation. Now, we're working with a kettlebell, and when we go into that single leg work, we're taking off that even base of support. And so it increases the likelihood of our hip rotating, either collapsing in or over rotating out in trying to maintain balance. And the same with the spine as we're coming down, having the spine go one way or the other. So once you have that contact in the floor, we want to think about bringing your hip, if it's collapsing down, bring your hip up even so that your hip bones are evenly lined up across. If you're pushing out too far and your hip is opening up, then bring your hip back down so that you feel a lot more of that engagement through the back of the leg. If your hip's opened up, you're going to feel it on the outside of your leg and just your glute. From there, that will help maintain a nice even line. Number 4, the floating leg. We don't want the floating leg to simply be hanging out. You are actually thinking about keeping it somewhat engaged. Now, when I go into this single leg deadlift, I can keep a slight bend in that leg. I can also lock it out. That makes it a little bit easier to have a defined connection from heel to foot. And from there, as I go through my single leg deadlift, again, I think about that bullseye as I drive that heel back towards its point of contact in the air, as opposed to just hanging out and floating. Hanging out and floating, less overall connectivity, less stability, and therefore less ability to get more repetitions and develop strength that then creates a greater evenness from one side to the other. Finally, your hip extension. Hip extension is going to be at the top. When we come up, you're driving through the ground, coming up to full hip extension. It is so easy to go into that single leg deadlift, up, down, and just come up partial way. Now, you may get a little bit of an extra burn in that booty, but what we're looking for is also on top of that, having a greater degree of connectivity from hips all the way through down your chain, which creates better balance across from one hip to the other. So when you come up to the top, get full extension. It also challenges your balance a little bit more, which is a positive. A couple modifications to keep in mind. Balance can be hard, and so sometimes we need a bit more of a step to get there. So when you are going to do your single leg deadlift, you can actually keep your toe on the ground. So that as I'm here, I've got my heel up, I've got light contact with my toes to the ground, and as I go into my deadlift, I just slide those toes forward and back so that at any point, if I feel myself coming off, I know I've got that contact to keep me up, and then I re-engage. And if that is still too challenging, then you can always take your toes into a staggered stance, which is bring your toes of the opposite leg, that would be your floating leg, put them in line with your heel and raise up, and from there go into your staggered stance deadlift. This staggered stance deadlift is slowly putting more and more on the load on the leg that you'll eventually do singles with. The other thing to keep in mind is when you are working with holding the kettlebell. Now, when we're doing a single leg deadlift with the kettlebell, I'm maintaining shoulders back, proud chest, ribs connected to hips. I'm not slouching over or allowing the kettlebell to pull me out of position. I want to own and control, at least to start. From there, because the kettlebell is a longer lever, that can sometimes make it more challenging. Because if we move and we're losing our balance, the kettlebell starts to swing around, we lose more balance because we're having to try and get this kettlebell under control. So what you can do is you can bring it up into a chest hold position. You're still working with kettlebell weight, and from that position, it's still challenging the ability to do that because the kettlebell connected to the chest is adding load to your upper body, which is tipping you over. That helps you sit back further into that high hinge. So it's a good way to instigate sitting back further if you're having a hard time with that, and keeping the kettlebell closer and over your base support for a little easier balance. Now that we have a solid foundation of how to do the single leg kettlebell deadlift, let's look at a sample workout to incorporate it with something more all around for good lower body strength development with some movements that complement the single leg deadlift itself. You'll do these exercises for their designated reps as a circuit for 3 to 5 rounds, depending on how your legs hold up. Sometimes you don't feel focused and alert in the gym, and your workout can suffer as a result. New Alpha Brain pre-workout was designed specifically for athletes and gym goers and supports focus, power, and endurance. It's the ultimate way to charge up your mind and body. Use the coupon code GETONNIT to get 10% off Alpha Brain pre-workout at onnit.com. Now, let's get back to the video. Now that you have a solid foundation around the single leg kettlebell deadlift itself, let's build out a sample workout that you can incorporate it into to get a good overall lower body strength development session done. We're going to utilize 3 extra movements that complement the single leg deadlift, and you're going to do them for their given reps. You're going to do them in a circuit, which means you do one exercise after the other without any rest Once you're done your circuit, you're gonna do 2 minutes of rest. 2 minutes may sound like a lot, but when you're doing single leg work, you're gonna feel the burn very quickly, and the fatigue can compound to the point that it then gets difficult to do the 3 to 5 sets that I'm gonna get you to do with this workout. Repeat the circuit, followed by the rest, 3 to 5 total times. First exercise of the circuit is our single leg deadlift, 10 reps each side. Next exercise is the kneeling leg extension. You're going to get down on both knees and take your toes, lay them flat down on the ground, pick up the kettlebell, put it in a chest hold position at your sternum, and from here, with knees hip distance apart, you're going to slowly sink back as you push your hips forward. You're gonna feel your glutes firing off until you get to your edge and pop back up to straight. Next is the single rack high knee march. So you're gonna take your kettlebell and clean it into your single rack position. From here, we're gonna have your feet hip distance apart, and you're going to drive the base foot through the ground as you draw the opposite knee up as high as you can along with your toes, and then back down. And you're gonna do the other side, up and up. It will feel different from one leg to the other because you have the kettlebell on one side, but you're gonna do this for 20 reps total, 10 on each side. And finally, the modified sumo figure 4. What we're gonna do is you're gonna have your normal squat stance, then you're gonna take your feet out to 15 degrees, so it's more than 45, it's quite wide. You're gonna have the kettlebell, pick it up, have it in a rack position with 2 hands, and then we're gonna go down into your modified sumo. Pull your knees back tight. As you come up, you will then step to one side. Up, take your opposite foot, put it above your knee or over your shin, depending on what access you have to this, and then pull your knee back. Release, come back to your modified sumo. Squat down, come back up. Rotate first, come up, and figure 4. That rotation in your hips is gonna be absolute game changer for your single leg deadlift work that you're continuing to do here. You're gonna do this for 3 reps per side. So how often should you train your legs? Sometimes we tend to think more is better, but that's not always the case. A good rule of thumb for legs and lower body work, 3 days a week, non-consecutively. So meaning one day rest, example, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you're good to go. If you're going to focus on developing your single leg work, then do the single leg focused workouts 2 times per day, and then a regular even legged workout 1 time per day. You do that for a couple months, and then you can flip back where you are working on your squats, working on your deadlifts, whatever your normal leg routine is, and then continue the single leg deadlift work or single leg workout for the other day in the week. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the link in the description for a full guide to the single leg kettlebell deadlift and this workout.